Okay, it's 7:11 on Tuesday night, April the 7th, and you, the members of the class, have sent in your case treatments for the case at the end of chapter 6. And I've actually been writing notes. I wrote to a few of you, and I wrote some notes, and the more that I wrote the notes, and this is really an indication of your good work, the more I was noticing little nuances in the notes, and even some things that, as I thought about them, said, well, this could actually be an error. So this is a complex case. So, well, I don't know if it's necessarily complex. It's a nuanced case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to go through the case, reading it of a good student who did a good case treatment. And now the questions that we're getting to are more sophisticated than the ones that we had in the last couple of weeks. And this has been true for the 4 or 5 people whose papers I looked at. I'd also say to those 4 or 5 people, if you received an email from me, I would say pretty much disregard that email and go with what's on this video. Because in the process of going through the paper, I'm just seeing different approaches here. Okay. So this student begins, and she does what almost all of you always are generally doing now. The facts are good. So Green Corporation had plans to acquire Black Corporation for some time. The price of Black Corporation stock went from $37 a share. The CEO of Green, Mr. Jones, approached the CEO of Black, Mr. Smith. Mr. Jones offered to acquire Black for $55 per share, which was an obviously high premium over the current stock price. And Smith immediately found the offer to be fair. That's a key word there. Immediately found the offer. That's a detail that you like in facts. Smith immediately found the offer to be fair and said that he would recommend his board of directors and shareholders, recommend to the board of directors and shareholders to accept the offer as well. However, Smith did not do any detailed research into the actual value of the company or ask Jones what the $55 offer price was even based on. Smith did as he promised, and after discussion with his board, obtained approval for the sale. Some shareholders of Black were upset over the deal and claimed that the price of $55 was only about 60% of what the company was really worth. In defense of his and the board's actions, Smith cited the business judgment rule and said that even if the company was worth more than $55, neither he nor the board had any liability for their actions. That line, Smith cited the business judgment rule. That is a very interesting line, both in the case problem and in this presentation of the facts. Because the business judgment rule is not an ethical concept. The business judgment rule, and I misstated that on one of the early papers that I was making notes on. That's what drove me to this video, because I realized I missed a small detail there, but an important one. The business judgment rule is a rule, it's a concept of the law of corporations. So the business judgment rule is a rule that's used in court to argue against or to show liability in the decision that an officer of a corporation will make in relation to what the corporation is doing. It is not an ethical concept, it's a legal concept. Okay? And that's an important distinction. So what's the main issue of this case in this ethical case treatment? Is the main issue whether the CEO, Mr. Smith, was liable? No. The main issue was, and let's see what this student wrote. The main issue in this case is whether Mr. Smith, the CEO of Black Corporation, made the right decision accepting Green's Corporation offer to acquire Black for $55 per share. That is not the issue. Okay, I mean that's an intelligent issue. That's a result of hard work. That's somebody really looking at the case. That's not the issue. The issue is not whether Mr. Smith made the right decision. The issue is whether Mr. Smith made an ethical decision. Now, he cites the business judgment rule. So he's saying, look, what I did showed diligence and prudence. He's making that claim for it. Said, I made a business decision. Now, I'm sort of skipping away from issue into analysis here to say he's saying that he made a business decision. Now, in your analysis, what would you point to that he's making the claim that it was a prudent and diligent business decision? He jumped on it immediately. He thought it was a good opportunity. He thought it was a good opportunity for the company. The CEO that wanted to buy the company, whatever his name is, Mr. Jones made an offer that was far above the stock value. So he thought, we want to sell this. We want to sell this company. We're getting a real big deal, a good deal. We have to act now. We can't lose this deal. That's his rationale under the business judgment rule. Okay, so if it isn't whether he made the right decision, but it's whether he made the ethical decision, that is going to influence your analysis. Now, let's see. This student continues doing what you're supposed to do, justifying the issue with facts. So I'm saying that's not the issue. Is not whether he made the right decision. The issue is whether he made the ethical decision. It said Mr. Smith believed Mr. Jones, the CEO of Green Corporation, was giving him a fair offer due to the high premium over the current stock price, which was $37 a share. See, this is actually, if we really dissect this, that sentence, which is a great sentence, belongs in the analysis section. It doesn't belong in the issue section. Okay. All you're doing in the issue section is you're saying this is the issue and it's justified by these relevant facts. So the issue section should be a lot tighter here. It's just simply the issue is whether Mr. Smith acted ethically. Mr. Smith and the board, I guess, because they approved it and they made the deal. Did Mr. Smith and the board act ethically when they made when they purchased the corporation, the other Green Corporation, from Mr. Smith? I'm sorry, I confuse the names of the Green and Jones and Smith, and I can't keep track of that. When they purchased the corporation from the other CEO, when they allowed the other corporation to purchase, okay, this is crazy. It's a little frustration with the writing of the problem. That's neither here nor there. So anyway, what are the facts that support that issue? Whether Mr. Smith and the board acted ethically in accepting Green Corporation's offer to acquire Black Corporation for $55 a share. And then, let's see. See, this is what I mean. This is something that has to be talked through. I can't do it with those notes. Those notes are really failing me and you. All right, so Mr. Smith believed Mr. Jones, the CEO of Green Corporation, was giving him a fair offer due to the high premium over the current stock price, which was $37 a share. That actually is a good factual statement to relate to this issue. Okay. Mr. Smith accepted this offer immediately and recommended his board of directors and shareholders do the same without doing the proper detailed research. That's a little bit, that phrase. You see how nuanced we're getting here and the high level of the work that this student is doing. Without doing the proper detailed research, that's you're actually kind of being conclusory there. I mean, and what you're supposed to be doing in this particular phase is just establishing your issue. So, the proper detailed research, is it always the proper detailed research? If you have a car and the car is worth $500 and somebody comes up to you and says, I'll give you $3,000 cash for your car right now. I just love that car. And roughly it's worth $500, but you don't know. But are you gonna do the detailed research at that point? Is that the prudent thing to do? Or do you just sell the car? So the proper detailed research, it's not always proper. Okay. Some of the shareholders argue that the price of $55 was only about 60% of what the company was really worth. And that is very nuanced and good. And you see how these, and I think this is something for everybody, kind of even including me. As I looked at it, these cases are not as easy as we think they are. This is the reason why you got to go through the whole process. I mean, it's easy to come to a strong feeling that you have about that the case should go one way or another, and then more or less decide it, and then go through some motions to try to justify it. But actually, when you really start looking at it, you're going to keep changing and honing and rewriting and thinking about this in order to make the decision. So the shareholders argued that the price of $55 was only 60% of what the company was really worth. Now, here we go. So the ethical question here, this is the students writing here. The ethical question here is whether Mr. Smith did indeed make the right decision immediately accepting Green's offer of $55, and did he fulfill all his obligations as an officer with this decision? Now, the first part, so this is, again, this thing about the right decision. It's not whether he made the right decision. It's whether he made the ethical decision. Okay, the shareholders could be right. They could have the right value. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that the shareholders are correct in terms of that the company was worth more. But did Mr. Smith do anything ethically wrong? That's the first part of it. And then the second part of it, which we're going to discuss now, which is another nuanced thing, is, and did he fulfill all of his obligations as an officer with this decision? No, that's not right, because it's not relevant whether he fulfilled all of his for purposes of this case. We're not looking at whether he fulfilled all of his obligations as an officer with this decision. Now, that's counterintuitive, because in the Heinz dilemma, Goldberg, sorry about that. Okay. So in the Heinz dilemma, you looked at all the steps of Goldberg, because what made reasonable sense in that case was that you were considering all the possible ways, I'm sorry, but forgive me, but we're working at home here. So what are you going to do? Okay, so it's like, you in the Heinz dilemma, you looked at all the steps of Kohlberg because you were looking for every possible option that Heinz would have. Okay, in the King's dilemma, you looked at those various ethical systems. You looked at all of these ethical systems, and you even looked at it like deistic ethics, and you didn't have any factual information about what the King's religion was. So why would you look at deistic ethics? But you did, because that was a possible option if you knew what his religion was. In this case, that reasoning does not apply. Okay? In this case, that reasoning does not apply. It's not relevant. In Kohlberg and in the King's dilemma, looking at every possible option was relevant, because that's how you were determining that's how you were doing your analysis to determine what the best option was. In this case, it's not relevant. The duty of loyalty has to do with self-dealing. There's no evidence at all to say that that the CEO or the board of directors were trying to cheat the company. And duty of obedience, the articles of incorporation aren't mentioned at all. It has nothing to do with that. So that's kind of a curveball that's part of this case. I mean, in this particular case, you want to only look at the duty of care. Okay, so you look at the duty of care. Now this particular student goes into her analysis. There are 3 general duties that officers and directors of a corporation are subject to follow. That's true, doesn't belong in the case, has nothing to do with the case. First general duty is the duty of obedience, has nothing to do with the case. This duty means that you're to act outside of the scope of the corporate purpose as it's defined in the company's articles of incorporation, or in violation of the laws of the state in which the company is incorporated. All right. That has nothing to do with this case. And then what she says, intelligently, based on what we did in the previous 2 cases, there is no information regarding Black's mission statement. But here's what she does that goes against what we're doing. However, one would assume that the corporation's mission statement would reference the company's obligation to their shareholders. You can't make an assumption like that. You can't, especially about a mission statement, by the way, because they're all different, and whether they're actually followed is a whole question. Some defense contractor can say we're dedicated to promoting peace throughout the world, and they're selling weapons all over the place. They say, well, you need weapons in order to get peace. You have to fight wars in order to crazy stuff in mission statements. So that you couldn't go by. And articles of incorporation is like anything else legal. Sometimes they're drafted well. Sometimes they're not drafted well. Sometimes they're drafted well, but the circumstances change and they're not changed quickly enough. And it's not that cut and dry or that simple to say that they're being obedient to the articles of incorporation. As a matter of fact, there's a whole huge area of the law of corporations, that has an awful lot to say about what obedience would be to those articles. So that's not cut and dry. So that's not something to reasonably speculate about. But you don't have to, because you don't have to talk about the duty of obedience. And she continues to talk about the duty of loyalty. Duty of loyalty dictates that a director or corporate officer must act in good faith and must not allow his or her personal interests to prevail over the interests of the corporation. Yeah, well, this has nothing to do with that. You don't have anything about the CEO or the board acting for their own personal interests. I mean, acting for your own personal interest would be that, if you're if you're in charge of if you're a procurement manager and you say, well, if I buy from this company, they're going to give me a kickback of $1,000 for each unit that I buy. You get something out of it. You get something out of it personally. There's no reason to talk about that in this case. You have no facts at all that says that there's any self-dealing going on by the CEO or by the board of directors. So, okay, so we skip down. It says the duty of care requires you to be diligent and prudent in managing the corporation's affairs. Under the law of corporations called the business judgment rule, this is very good. You are not liable for losses incurred for decisions you make in good faith and in the exercise of reasonable care. But there's one other thing that you might notice that the author has in that section. He says something to the effect of, try getting a job and saying that you're gonna act and you're gonna make decisions in good faith and in the exercise of reasonable care, and you're not liable for making mistakes. This is the tension, and you're acting with diligence, you're not going to be liable. The reality of business is you're going to get a response like the CEO and the board got from the shareholders. So that's the reality. So how are you going to balance this out? This is your dilemma. Okay, this is your dilemma. And the argument about liability, it's not this is where you're using actually the CEO used the business judgment rule to justify his actions. So you're justifying your actions with the business judgment rule, but you have another expectation coming from the shareholders. So it's really not cut and dry. So you have to, what actually is the ethical, what is your ethical duty here? What's your ethical duty of care? And there's a lot of ways you could go with that in terms of your analysis. And we'll get there when we get to the analysis. I'm just, now this whole thing, she goes into the 7 pillars of corporate compliance. Not relevant. Not relevant. Nothing about policies. You don't want to write these things as book reports. These are case treatments. So, this is great. It's good that she read all this stuff and she thought about it. It doesn't have anything to do with this case. Like the importance of conducting effective ethics training and education has nothing to do with the case. Taking standards to communicate effectively its standard to procedures to all its employees, nothing to do with the case. All right, developing effective lines of communication, nothing to do with the case. The open line of communication between the ethics officer and company personnel, nothing to do with the case. Talking about hotlines, nothing to do with the case. Okay, so it's not just, it's not just take everything in the chapter and apply it to the case. Take everything in the chapter if it all applies. If Kohlberg all applies and that's what you were assigned to read, use all of it. If all the ethical systems in chapter 3 apply to the king, use all of them. But if they don't all apply, such as in chapter 6, you don't use all of them. That's an important lesson to get out of doing chapter 6, about understanding the idea of relevance. What's relevant? Okay. There's a lot of stuff on pillars, federal sentencing guidelines. I mean, there's paragraphs and paragraphs, all really good understanding of what's in the pillars. No. And now this is, I do believe, Mr. Smith failed to put the company and shareholder interest before his own. The, I guess we're in the analysis section now. If that's really your analysis, that you think you violated the duty of loyalty, I would argue you have no evidence at all to argue that. This was shown by his immediate decision to accept an acquisition offer based off of an initial reaction and dedication to his promise with Mr. Jones. But maybe, how can you assume because he had an initial reaction, how can you assume that he was acting out of self-interest or self-dealing? I don't see anything in the case where he got any money. I don't see anything in the case where he got any personal benefit to himself at all. So I don't know where the duty of loyalty comes in. Now, okay. Now we get to duty of care, I think. Also, Mr. Smith did not properly research the ethical responsibilities that he is obligated to uphold before accepting this offer. Um, I don't get that. He didn't properly research the ethical responsibilities that he's obligated to uphold before accepting the offer. It seems to me he made an argument related to the duty of care. He said he followed the business judgment rule, so he was claiming that he fulfilled his ethical obligation by being consistent with the business judgment rule, which is a rule of corporate law. This is what he's arguing. So I don't get that line exactly, and I don't see the evidence. Again, in the analysis, you've got to connect the evidence to some sort of higher level thought. You have to be complete in the evidence and specific in your understanding of the thought. If Mr. Smith properly researched the value of the company and did come to the same conclusion as some of the shareholders have made, which is that $55 per share offer only reflects 60% of what the company is really worth, then he most likely would not have made the same decision. The problem with this is we don't know if Mr. Smith was right. We don't know if the shareholders are right. We don't know. We don't know if he said he jumped on it immediately. So we can assume that he thought that he had a deal that he had to strike on quickly. Now, if a business person has a deal that they have to strike on quickly, if they feel the prudent thing to do is to take advantage of an opportunity now, and they have evidence right in front of them that it's a substantial of a substantial value over the current stock price. You could argue that he's wrong. You could argue, I think you could argue pretty strongly in corporate law that he's not liable. And now the issue is the business judgment rule enough to fulfill the duty of care, which is not a law, but is an ethical concept. And these are conclusory statements within the analysis. By making a rash decision based on a quick evaluation of the share value, he is showing a lack of commitment to this responsibility. Okay, I guess what I'm doing is that that might be true. It might be true, or it might not be true. But I think it has to be argued more than just making that conclusion. So the other point of view should be represented as well. You know, And I think this is a situation where you have to ask questions. And by the way, this is nuanced too, because this isn't making up new facts. This is really considering, for example, if you said with deistic ethics with the king, if you would say, depending on his religion, it said, we can't say what his decision is going to be because his decision would depend on the religion. And so you say, well, if he's a Catholic, he's going to do it one way. If he's a Buddhist, he's going to do it another way or whatever. But you're saying that these are all the possible options, but we don't know what his religion is. In this particular situation, we really don't know what the standard and practice is for this business or in this circumstance. And I think actually it's arguable that deals are made both ways, that deals are made with very sophisticated business valuations going on, and there's a lot of research and background because and people strike while the iron is hot. So I think that you have to kind of you can't just there's 2 points of view here, and I think what you have to do is you have to discuss each one of them, and then you can come to any conclusion that you want to. You can go on the side of the CEO, you could go on the side of the shareholders, or you could say, well, it could be seen from both ways, and depending on how you want to look at it. And I think if you went with that both way thing, you'd probably come to the conclusion that if it can be seen from both ways, then the CEO and the board acted ethically. If you can see it from both ways. If the attitude is that now, given what you have in the book, if you wanted to go in the direction of taking the shareholder's point of view and saying he didn't exercise care, then the higher level thought you have in the book is the whole passage where Roe in the book says, try getting a job by arguing that you're going to be prudent and that you're going to just follow what you need so that you don't have legal liability. That's going to be the threshold of how you make a business decision. He says, try getting a job with that attitude, that they expect results. So what is really duty of care? What does he owe to the shareholder's expectation? You actually have that in the higher level thought in the book. Okay. Okay, I think we're in the conclusion now. In summary, Black CEO, Mr. Smith, made the impulsive decision. You see, again, that's not a conclusion. You're conclusory right from the beginning. You've got to go through the whole process. You got to say, these are the facts, and go into detail with the facts. He got this offer. He made the quick decision. To make the assumption that it's impulsive and just start right there, I mean, I think that it's a strong impulse. You want the case to, if you want to get to the point where you're saying it's impulsive or unwise, that he was reckless in his decision or whatever, you have to build to it. And in your conclusion, what you're doing is that you're reiterating your case in chief in a detailed summary. Okay, so the first line of the conclusion is you're jumping to the decision, and you don't want to do that. So let's see. Mr. Smith failed to properly research the value of the company and did not ask Mr. Jones, the CEO of Green Corporation, about his reasoning behind the offer price. As a result, some shareholder, well, that's good. You're getting into the facts. That's good. But then, as an officer, Mr. Smith is obligated to 3 general duties. That's irrelevant in the conclusion because this case is only about the duty of care. and it highlights specific instances where Mr. Smith is found violating these obligations. Yeah, and duty, loyalty, no, that doesn't matter. And then he said a clear lack of effort, which was demonstrated by his failure to engage in the necessary research. And you really haven't proven. You see, you can't talk about things that you haven't proven or at least argued to be proven. You're making conclusory assertions that you haven't earned. I mean, you would have to give some argument to show why that research was necessary. I'm not saying you can't argue it. But was it necessary because there was a higher expectation? The reasonable person would realize that the shareholders had a higher expectation of what his processes would be in making a decision. Well, the shareholders said that after the fact when they didn't like the decision. You know, would they have said it if he made the quick decision and they made a killing? If there was he made a lot of money? These are all the things. In other words, you can come down on any side of it that you want, but you really have to think about both sides of it, and you have to reason. You have to analyze it. So this is a tough analysis here, because it's not just the analysis. You are using the exact same form. You're taking the higher level thought, which is the duty of care, and you're analyzing the duty of care based on the facts of the case. And the facts of the case have to do with the CEO making a quick deal because he thought the price that he was being offered was well over the stock market, the stock price at the time. And the board of directors went along with him. And then the shareholders thought that the company was worth a lot more. So the shareholders challenged what the CEO did. The CEO said, under the business judgment rule of corporate law, liability. So I did the right thing ethically. So then the question is, well, did he do the right thing ethically? And is the duty of care just following the business judgment rule? And that raises a bigger question about what's the difference between the law and ethics. So this now this paper again. I was just talking about this at dinner with my wife. Actually, I was talking to my wife about the idea that what's really tough about the way this course is set up is that you make great progress, but you don't necessarily see it. So that's what becomes difficult. This is looking at this paper and all the other, I've looked at about 5 so far. All right. And all the other papers, everybody is really getting what this format is of the methodology of case. Everybody knows how to put together facts. Everybody knows what's required by issues. Everybody knows what's required by analysis and recommendations and decisions and conclusions. Of the 5 papers I saw, everybody's handling the format well. The method, not the format, the method. Here are the things that are coming up, and these cases always bring new problems. And I have to admit, I stumbled over this business judgment versus duty of care and the nuance that was involved with that. You know, at first, because I thought, yes, you know, business judgment is a legal concept, but it's basically being applied here in an ethical context. But that's not the point. The point of this case, actually, which really makes it this is really a highly sophisticated case. You got to really respect these cases, because this is really, you know, it raises a lot of really important points about case making that you're learning from the experience of doing it. And a couple of the real big ones that are new ones to come up is that what's relevant? what facts are relevant, what higher level thought is relevant. So and that is counterintuitive based on Hines and based on the King's Dilemma. That's counterintuitive, but you're not just painting by numbers. You have to see that nuance. Hines and you were going through a laundry list with Kohlberg and with those ethical systems in the first two cases. You were going through a laundry list, but that laundry list was all relevant because you were looking for the best. You were comparing all the possible options to apply to the issue in that case. In this case, all the higher level thought that you were given in the chapter was not relevant to this problem. This problem is specifically, the issue is specifically, did the CEO and the board follow a duty of care? Was his action ethical? And then what's related to that is that, and this is another broader question, was being consistent with the business judgment rule, but enough to evidence duty of care. Interestingly, Rowe named this book Business Ethics: A Conversation. So interestingly, he left that open. He left it open when he says that thing about try getting a job if you say that all you're gonna do is comply with the business judgment rule, which means you're only taking responsibility for your prudence and your diligence, and if it doesn't work out, it's not your fault, which is a principle of corporate law. And he's saying go into a job with that attitude. He said you're not going to get the job because they want you to be a lot more effective than that. But then the question is, what they asking for? Is that ethical? This is really this is really a thoughtful piece. So as I said, I was trying to write out notes to everybody about this, and it's really impossible because I found myself writing an essay to everybody. So I'm just making this video. And also this week we're going to try something else. I want you to listen to this video, okay, and really apply it. This is the standard thing for the class now. You're gonna rewrite now. You're gonna rewrite the case, the chapter 6 case. You're gonna rewrite that, and you're gonna put that in your case portfolio, which is gonna come in you're gonna hand in the last 2 weeks of the class. Okay, and then for next week, we are going to do the problem, chapter 7. Okay, so next week, chapter 7, and the week after that, chapter 8. But next week, chapter 7. So do the rewrite. This is what I'd strongly suggest. Do your rewrite of chapter 6. Of course, do your ethical presence journal entry. You're doing that every week. And then thank you. Thank you very much. This is a hard one. All right. That's it. Thank you.